And it's being recorded for all time.
So my tip sheet says, get ready. And that's, get the Zoom people ready, get Jim ready, get the panel ready, get Judy ready.
You're supposed to be talking into the microphone.
Oh,
Don't walk too far.
Okay, so yes, I won't go through all my crib sheet, but there were about 6 things I had to get ready. And, I'm Pat Kremer. I used to be Patty McCarthy. Some of you maybe even knew that already. And I'm very excited today. We're going to be having a panel discussion about the Pacifica Tribune. It's entitled Pacifica Tribune Recording Local History. But first of all, we need to have a short business meeting because this is a quarterly meeting. So without further ado, I'm going to introduce Judy Helberg, who is our Pacifica Historical Society president.
Hi, everybody. I'm so glad you're here today. We're so glad to be here in person. This is hope it all keeps lasting. So welcome, welcome. The museum has been open since last July on Tuesday, Thursday, Saturday from 1 to 5. And I'm sorry, 1 to 4. What do I know? With our wonderful docents here. Sometimes we have 20 people, sometimes we have 1, but we're here. If you're a docent already, would you put your hand up? And would the rest of you please bow down to them? Oh, I should, same thing. If you're a board member, would you please put your hand up? And would you all please bow down to without the docents and the board members, this wouldn't happen. This building wouldn't even be here. Shirley found a headline newspaper about how it was saved. There it is. Yeah, talking all about how it's up to us if we're going to save this building. So we got one. So when you get to the end of this, and Pat will tell you about that. Papers. What did we start with? 60s, 70s, 80s, 90s, and then the 2000s are over here. If you want a paper, please take it. Please take many papers. You see, we have quite a few. And these are extras. So these are for you. And there are donation boxes sitting around with a little picture of our church on it. If you feel like giving us something for that paper, it would be lovely. Shirley Gibbs, do you want to make a little report about the train? We got this building going and we're still here. And now we're working on the train. We're just gluttons for punishment around here. So we want to make it up.
This is very short. The work is progressing on the train, more so since the 1st of January. We are about ready to secure bids for the roof, and we have ordered 72 tempered glass windows for the train at a cost of $31,000. We have a new employee that's doing custom work around the for us around the windows. That's all I have on the train, but remember the rummage sale, which all proceeds go to the train, is this year on the 8th and 9th of April. Thank you.
Thank you. Unless somebody in the audience has business we should bring up. Thank goodness. Okay. We don't have to do that. The only other thing I want to remind you about is cheese. There's cheese in the gift shop, in the fridge. It turns out that cheese is our biggest seller. We sell books, we sell t-shirts, we sell stuff, but mostly we sell cheese. This is the Pacifica Jack cheese. If you don't know the story, there's a little card in there to tell you. It's $8 a pound, and it's absolutely delicious cheese. If you've not had it, isn't it good? You can buy it anytime this place is open. I mean, we always have cheese in there. You need to buy several pounds. All right. And And if that's all right with you, I will conclude the business of this meeting. I hope that was short enough. Pat, do you want to come back and take over and tell us about these grand people who are sitting at our table?
Okay. So as I said before, I'm very excited about having this panel today. And we're going to be discussing the history of the Pacifica Tribune. We're also going to be discussing the present and the future. In a way, part of the mission of today is to think about how we're going to save the Pacifica Tribune. Speaking as someone who's interested in local history, we wouldn't have our archives. We wouldn't have a good sense of our local history if we'd not had a truly excellent local newspaper. So some of you are aware of how excellent it's been for over, well, in Bill Drake's time, from 1959 to 1989, you'll see examples of the paper. And it was really the way people found out what was going on in town. Wednesday morning, everybody was home reading their Tribunes. Yes, I was going to say also we have Tribunes galore to give away. Hopefully you'll want to donate something to. And we have a new exhibit upstairs. We have Bill Drake's original desk. The typewriter there may not be the original typewriter, but Horace said that they did not have electric typewriters when he first went to work at the Tribune. We also, just this last year, got the Tribunes digitized from 1957 through about 2013. Currently, they're only available on newspapers.com that you have to subscribe to, or you can come here and upstairs we have free access right here. So whenever the museum's open, you can look up some newspapers you're interested in, and it's all searchable. Probably bring a USB if you want to copy down a lot. There's one more thing. Oh yes. We also have some original papers in a big notebook upstairs. Some examples. It's a display we had before, and it's now up again, called History Through Headlines. Okay, no more for me here. Our panel, number one is going to be Horace Henshaw, who didn't quite come in 1959, but he's the member who has been associated with the Tribune the longest in our panel. Next is Laura Del Rosso. Laura grew up in Lindemar. Actually, Laura grew up in Pedro Valley. Her family were farmers and then sold most of the land to Odsted, and he put in ranchers instead of artichokes. Our third panelist is Rennie Batty. Rennie worked for the Tribune for a number of years and actually then took over when Bill retired as managing editor for a short time, fairly a year or two.
I was managing editor before.
Okay, she'll tell you the actual facts. And last, but actually not at all least, is Kylie Lambert, and he is the current editor of the Pacifica Tribune. And he's really worked hard and has had good support from people. It's not as fat as it was 50 years ago, but it's getting to be quite a good quality paper for what's there.
Again.
So again, I think we want to subscribe to the paper and keep it going.
So
How about a nice hand of applause for Pat? Good afternoon, everybody. I'm Horace Hinshaw, and if we're going to be late for dinner, you'll be late for dinner. We have a lot of years to cover here about Pacifica Tribune. And trust me, I can talk all the time about it. So, yeah. As you well know, and I hope everybody in this room has sometime or another taken the Pacifica Tribune. It's been in existence for over 63 years now, but that was the Bill Drake era. We're going to talk about the Bill Drake era as we go through the panel here today, but I think I'd like to take you back a little bit farther than when 1959 when Bill brought the paper. The first paper in Pacifica actually was born in 1938 in Sharp Park. And I do not know the house or the street that it was on. It'd be great to find out that the house was located. But it was started by a family called Maud and Bill Pish, and they produced it for a couple, 2 or 3 years. The husband died, and Maud decided she wanted to keep the paper, so she kept the paper going, and they operated up until 1957. Now you say, how did they do that? Where did they put a printing press in Sharp Park? Well, you know, they had a way of doing it. The Half Moon Bay Review, believe it or not, has been around over 100 years. So they got together with, at that time, the publisher of the Half Moon Bay Review, and they had print the paper for them. So isn't it funny how things go in circles? 100 years later, they're back working with the Half Moon Bay Review, but that's interesting to see what happened. So after they had the paper, they sold it to another gentleman. I don't know if you recall, he lived here for a long time. There was a store in Rockaway Beach called the Rockaway Beach Trading Post, and that paper was sold to this gentleman, who really didn't keep it for a long time because he was in bankruptcy and he couldn't really do anything. Well, way back in New Jersey area, New York City, there was a gentleman that was graduated from college, and he was on some newspapers throughout his early life. And he wanted to own a newspaper. So he got in his car and he kept driving and driving. And this is not the Bill Drake area yet. So this guy came driving, and he came upon to Pacifica. I just sightseeing. His name was Frank Blankfort. He and his wife stopped, and they got to talking to this gentleman who wanted to get rid of the paper. He was going bankruptcy, and so $5,000 he was able to buy what was at the time called the Shark Breakers and Pacifica Tidings. The Pacifica Tidings name actually came about by the city getting ready to go incorporated in 1957. It was originally called Shark Park Breakers, but at the 57, they tagged on the Pacifica Tidings. Well, this gentleman bought the paper, didn't like the name. He renamed it. He called it the Coastside Tribune. He then moved from the little Sharp Park housing that it was operating out of down to Pacific Manor, where it stayed for years and years and years. If you're familiar with the Pacific Manor or Ora Vista, now called Bill Drake Way in honor of our late publisher. At that time, he then brought in and had some presses built. So for years and years, the paper operated there with presses. Today, we don't use presses because we use the paste typing. And Clay can tell you more about that, how he does it today. But at that time, the shop was big enough to build these presses and have these operations run. So this gentleman, Bill Drake, came from Indiana. He wanted to buy a paper. He was already working for United Press International back in Indiana and also Nebraska area. And so he wanted to buy a paper. He really was interested in owning his own paper. So he looked through these journals, these trade journals, and he came across this town called Sharp Park / Pacifica. Had no idea where it was. So he told his wife, I'm going to go out to California and check and see what this is all about. She allegedly at first was not too crazy about the idea, but she thought, well, this sounds good. And so he got into the car and drove out and came up on this nice, beautiful city with the ocean in its backyard. Went and talked to Mr. Frankfurt, and between them, they decided to sell the paper to Bill. And so he then called his wife and said, hey, yes, honey, this is what I've got for you, newspaper. So they jumped in the car and flew out and got everything here and sent up the paper and started operating from 1959 to 1989. when Bill decided to retire. But a little bit about Bill Drake. Bill was, as I said, from Indiana. He lived there, went to school back in that area. And unfortunately, he contracted rheumatic fever. And the doctor said, you know what, you'd be better off by moving to Arizona. He wanted to go into the service, but he could not be drafted because of the system with his disease. So he came out to Tucson, Arizona, went to work with the paper there. The paper said, well, since you really are so involved in the military, and you want to know a lot about the military, we're going to send you to do this story at the draft board about people getting drafted into the service. So he goes down, talks to this lady down there, who happens to turn out later to be his wife, Peggy Drake. And so they got married. He flew back to, they both of them flew back to Indiana. He got a job back there in Nebraska doing something in a newspaper, UPI again, setting up, managing several newspapers. But he also wanted to do his own newspaper. So that's why he decided to come back to Pacifica and bought the newspaper. But as you can see, over 63 years of the Pacifica Tribune, it's been a tremendous paper. And Bill set up shop and he did everything. He wrote, he did the advertising. He actually got his hands wet with the heat back at the press shop. He had a good staff, and when he first set it up, his family was really the people behind it. He had three children. One of them sitting right here in the front row, Andrea Drake right here. And he had a daughter, Kathy Drake, and a son, Ken Drake, and they all put the paper together for those couple of years before he was able to get a staff together. And he did everything. He went out to all the local parties with the city council. He wrote the paper, he took the pictures. He carried his trusty notebook around with him all the time. He was known for his trademark as the notebook, a camera, and his bow tie. I today carry my notebook with me everywhere I go because he said, you never know where you're going to get a story. So I still carry it with me as I go. Now, so he did the whole thing and put the paper together, and eventually he was able to put staff on. Rainey was one of our staff people who came on later, and Laura, of course, was one of those students, high school students that was able to put a name with the paper. She's probably got her first byline when she wrote a story at the Pacific Tribune, because he was really generous about trying to get young people into the journalism field, and he did a marvelous job. We took on a lot of high school kids and also Skyline College students who wanted to write, and he gave them bylines. We had a lot of photographers who came through the system. One gentleman who now is a photographer for the Washington Post, Craig Hudson. If you ever see that name, look for him, because he started, his first pictures was taking sports pictures on the Terranova football field. So it's one of those things that people carry with them. But if you ever pick up Washington Post, look for the name Craig Hudson. They're probably on the front page. So as time went by, Bill got the shop going and everything. And come 1969, I walk into the building. And Mary and I got married in 66, and we got moved to Pacific in 1969. We lived in the top of Fairmont, and at that time, Skyline College was opening up. And I was a sports writer back in Arkansas, where I was from originally, and I wanted to get back into the field. I'd already gotten a job with the Postal Service here in San Francisco, and over the times I was in the Postal Service, I was actually public affairs manager for the Postal Service for the West Coast. But I wanted to get back into the sports writing business, doing something in journalism. And I thought they might be the sports information director at the Skyline College. So I went up there and came in contact with a gentleman by the name of Sam Goldman. Now, Sam was their journalism person up there. And he told me, no, they don't have a need for somebody like that they're already set up. He said, but you know what? There is a small paper in Pacifica. It's called the Pacifica Tribune. His name is Bill Drake, and he's looking for somebody to handle sports. So I come down the next day, go into the office, and I can only do a part-time job. And so I talked to him, and I said, are you hiring somebody? He says, yes, we're looking for a person to do sports. And I said, I think I can handle that for you. And he said, not on part-time, you can't do that. I don't think you do part-time, because this is really something that needs to be done full-time, because we want to build this up and have a full sports department here. And I said, well, I wanted to do this. Why don't we just try it for 2 weeks? 2 weeks later, 51 years later, still writing. But that's how I got to the newspaper, and it's worked out gratefully that over the period of times. As I mentioned just earlier about the students writing, so I'm going to pass the mic to Laurie, who will tell you about her growing up in Pacifica and also writing.
Pat mentioned that I grew up in Pedro Valley. I actually lived in Pedro Valley for one day because I was born November 21st, 1957. And so I was born the day before Pacifica became incorporated. So I was a Pedro Valley person for one day. But my family had been in Pedro Valley since the 1930s. And, you know, back then, as Pat has mentioned, it was the Sharp Park Breakers that covered this area. And the Sharp Park Breakers is available online, thanks to one of our board members and one of my childhood friends, Denise Buckley, who got the Sharp Park Breakers online at the Internet Archive. So if you ever want to do any research on pre-1950s Pacifica, it is available. It's pretty interesting to go back there. You can find about Pat McCarthy's childhood. I found a lot of really great things about my own family. This is very interesting. You know, one of the things about the early artichoke farmers that were there, a lot of them were not pro-incorporation. A lot of them really enjoyed might have something to do with the taxes. They were afraid of maybe the property taxes going up. So they were not pro-incorporation. So in those days, at least the memories I have and talking to my relatives, this was really a group of really different communities. If you lived in Pedro Valley, you might drive through Sharp Park, but you wouldn't necessarily stop. So when Pacifica became incorporated, it was really a group of different areas that were brought together. So when I think of the Pacifica Tribune and what Bill Drake did, I think about the community that really came into being that was spread apart and really didn't have a whole lot in common. And I think the Pacifica Tribune was one of the things that brought the community together and really created a sense of community for this new city that was created in 1957. So I grew up and I went to Terra Nova, class of 75, and I was lucky enough to have a really great journalism teacher at Terra Nova, who was Lee Pacini, and he was a sports writer for the San Mateo Times. And he was a wonderful journalist himself, and we had an award-winning magazine at Terra Nova called Tiger Tales at the time. And one of the things that Bill Drake did is he would talk to Lee Pacini every year, and he would ask which of the students in Terra Nova would do a column a week. I think it was maybe twice a month. And I got to do that for a while, along with some of my other Tiger Tales people. And that was fun. It was my first byline other than Tiger Tales. So that was, it was like, what's going on in Terra Nova? Here it is. And Oceana also had that too. And then from there, I had this wonderful opportunity to continue my journalism studies right up the hill at Skyline College, because as Horace mentioned, this wonderful man was the journalism professor at Skyline College, and his name was Sam Goldman. And here, right up the hill from us, was the award-winning community college newspaper for all of California. It was produced right here in San Bruno. So, and Mr. Drake had a really good relationship with Sam Goldman, so he had a lot of the Skyline Press, which was the name of the newspaper at the college. So we got to write, again, we were sort of brought down to the Tribune, and we got a lot of exposure that way. A lot of our staff photographers also took pictures for the Tribune. And then from there, I went to San Jose State, and one of the requirements for the journalism department was an internship. So Bill Drake was nice enough to offer me a summer position And I was required to do 6 weeks, but it turned into almost 4 months. And Kathy was the editor, and I couldn't have gotten a better taste of what local community journalism is. I mean, we covered everything. And if you knew Bill Drake, you knew that he had the notebook, and if it was a Sunday night, he was on duty. And it didn't matter when anything happened or where it was. If it was in Pacifica, it was going to be in the Tribune that next week. And I think one of the stories I mentioned to Horace the other day, the others on the panel, was one night when I was an intern, a drunk driver ran through our driveway in Lindemar in the middle of the night, and we were up, we had the police there, we had this drunk driver, and I made it to work really late the next morning, and I apologized to Kathy and Bill. I said, I was up. I'm sorry I'm late, but I was up, and Bill just looked at me and said, write the story. That's all he cared about. It's like, okay, it happened to you, then it's a story. So, and of course, if you grew up in Pacifica in those days, you knew you were going to be in the paper when you graduated from 8th grade, when you graduated from Terra Nova. If your brother was on the baseball team, you knew that it was going to be in the paper. We were really lucky to have such a good newspaper when we were growing up. And I'm glad to know that it's still a place doing a really good job. So, anyway, that's my story.
So it was probably shortly after Laura and her internship that I started in the early 80s. And actually, this was my first venture into community journalism, because before I came to the Bay Area, I did some years as in daily journalism, the daily newspapers. And it had its ups and had its downs, but when I moved to the Bay Area, I wasn't really sure that I wanted to continue with newspapers, because there was something a little unsatisfying with the daily deadline of a newspaper. I happened to find out about the job. This was pre-Craigslist, from a classified ad in the Tribune, which, obviously is not going to be done anymore. And I met with the then managing editor, Paula Mabry, and who's still, I believe, involved in community journalism in Oregon, where she was from. And I took on the education beat, the arts coverage, and eventually assisted her with editing. And in, I believe it was 87, I became the managing editor. And this was a very transitional period, because about a year or a year and a half later is when Bill and Peggy sold the paper. And Bill at that point was retiring, and I stayed on for several more years after that. And I decided to stick with community journalism, because it was just really my niche. It was really what I wanted to do as a journalist. And I thank Bill for that, because he was the model of a community journalist. And I think most people in this room who have experienced Pacifica Tribune under the Drake's ownership really have a sense of the community that he helped build. As Laura said, he really helped build this community. His emphasis was every aspect of the community. And, sports, he was very adamant to have good sports coverage. But, frankly, I never did know whether Bill appreciated the arts, but he encouraged me anyway. It's like he never tried to emphasize one type of coverage over the other. And so we were a very well-rounded newspaper, I thought. And we stayed that way the entire time that they owned the paper. I think also one of the very positive aspects was community columnists. And Pat's mother, Grace McCarthy, was one of our stars, Paul Azevedo. Yes, I thought you looked familiar. So Paul and Grace were our two most regular columnists, but we had other people writing and from the community. All lived here. They all, ran into each other in the community, the grocery store, and the banks, and it really made a big difference in terms of maintaining the heart of our community. We had Shirley Fong Torres doing food writing. Lois Perez, who was later hired as a full-time reporter and feature writer. So it really, they really were conscientious, Bill and Peggy, about making sure that our community was represented in every way. And he was ready to retire, but I was sorry. All right, Clay.
I think I should just hop in just a second before Clay comes, because I think Clay is really the key that's going to tie this whole program together. But I think we ought to lead up to how it got to be in Clay's hand in the first place. And after Bill Drake sold the newspaper, it went through a change of several hands before it finally ended up in Clay's hands. And how that came about was Main Street Media bought the paper after Bill sold it. But they sold it to the Alameda News Group, which in turn sold it to the Bay Area News Group, which then in turn sold it to the First Digital Media. So you can see that after Bill sold it from 1969 until Clay put his hands on it, they'd gone through several mainstreams. And what happened with the Bay Area News Group, if you remember, recall the editor at the time when it was finally sold, Elaine Larson was our editor at that time. And the Bay Area News Group wanted to get rid of the paper. It was losing money. The advertising was not there. Elaine was sick, and unfortunately she died. And so they really had nothing going on there. Our mail carriers would stop delivering. They wouldn't go to the houses to deliver. People were getting upset. So they wanted to sell the paper and just close it out as a loss and forget about it. And I happened to have gone back to work with Elaine after I retired from the Postal Service in 2006. And the staff there, we got together. We said, "Hey, wait, let's don't do this. We need this Tribune. It's very important to our city." So I said to the people at that time, "We've got a staff here that's willing to take this on. So if you just put me in charge as interim editor, just because you got a name on it, we'll write it all the way up until you decide to sell it." So we did that for about a couple of years, and then eventually they sold the paper, if you recall, to Battleborn Media, which was operated by Sean Frederick, who had 6 newspapers up in San Bernardino County. He bought the newspaper in 2015, and he stayed aboard until 2020. And I'll throw it over to Clay because that's when the Hackman Bay came into play.
I'm Clay. I'm the newcomer. Just what a privilege it is to be here surrounded by people who care about community and newspaper and all these decades of Pacific history. So thanks for having me. All of you probably know more about the history of the Pacific Tribune than I do. The first inkling that I ever had that I'd be up here doing anything at all was probably 2018, I want to say, when some Pacifica residents called me and said, "Hey, you want to buy a newspaper?" and that the first answer was no. I don't want to buy a newspaper. First of all, I don't have money to buy a newspaper. And second of all, is it for sale? So those are the sort of the first things. And then I thought, I've been the editor at Hackman Bay Review for, at this point, it's about 18 years. I had worked at big regional dailies, and I was a sports writer. And in fact, the first time I ever came to the San Mateo County Post was 1995, I think. Of course, I'll probably tell you that it was a Falcons 49ers playoff game, and I was assigned to come and cover this playoff game. And then I thought, well, I'm here, you know, I should see the Pacific Ocean. I'm from the East Coast. So I drove over here and I looked around like, nice. And then I got back to the plane and left. But it never occurred to me that I'd be here for the rest of my life. So 2018, citizens come to us, say, we want to buy the paper. So I should say, this is not me, by the way. This is Coastside News Group, which is a group of people that started out in Half Moon Bay and now include Pacifica residents. And the way the Coastside News Group came to be was the Half Moon Bay Review was owned by a benevolent, very, very well-run, family-owned newspaper company called Wick Communications, and had been for a couple of decades. And one day Wick decided they wanted to sell the Half Moon Bay Review. And this concerned me mightily because I didn't know what that meant. And it became clear soon that what it meant was there would be some sort of capitalist firm that would buy it, who really had no interest in journalism, but would want to make some money off the market in Half Moon Bay. So I didn't like that. And so I went to some people in Half Moon Bay that I knew that I thought had sort of the means and understood the value proposition of a local newspaper, and that it wasn't a matter of how much money you could extract from it, but it was a matter of building community, as people have been saying. And they were people who were grounded in the community and really cared about the San Antonio County coast. So all 5 of those people thought it was a great idea and agreed. And we talked, you know, do we want to form a nonprofit? You know, what would we do? And Lenny Mendonça runs the Half Moon Bay Brewing Company and subsequently became Gavin Newsom's economic czar, for lack of a better term. He knows, you know, more about business than I could ever possibly know. Said, well, you don't need the paper's making money, so why would you want to be a nonprofit? So okay, well, that's my first lesson in business. So we didn't form a nonprofit. We formed what is called a California Benefit Corporation, which is pretty much like a regular C Corp in most respects. It's a for-profit business. However, it does 2 important things. One is we have in our incorporation documents that we signed there in 2017, 18, whatever that was. We say that we exist to do some community good. In fact, there's a statement on our website that talks about what that community good is, and it's updated every year. And the second thing that it does, that a benefit corporation does, is the shareholders sign a form that says they realize that we're not here to solely to make the most money for them. That we're there to do this community good. So those are 2 important signals, I think, to readers and also to the people who own the paper, which is really, really key. So we had this public benefit corporation. You know, shortly after talking to me, the Pacific folks talked to people in the CNGI board, Coastside News Group board, and over time, sort of became more interest. And there's a feeling that, you know, from my way of looking at it, from my years in Half Moon Bay, the tunnel was a big deal in terms of connecting Pacifica and Half Moon Bay, and it didn't feel like you were going, you know, around the world to get to your places. So, you know, the 2 communities are different in a lot of ways, but I think we share a lot of commonality and common interest in the environment and the coast and all that sorts of things. So I think those won out over time, and there was an interest in the Pacific Tribune, and a couple of Pacifica residents, including Cheryl Dickinson, joined our board, and the Tribune became a part of Coastside News Group in October of 2020, which is probably the worst time in the history of the newspaper. So I don't know about this, but I would say ever since then we've been learning a lot and try our best to keep things rolling and to make it better. And, you know, I would argue, you know, certainly the paper is not as thick as it was back in the day. For a lot of reasons. I mean, Part of it is advertising and big tech giants that sucked up all the advertising. And part of it is just the way we all find out about information anymore. We're not waiting around for Wednesday to learn what's going on. So, that doesn't mean that we don't still have an important role to building community and setting the agenda and what's going on. We try to do that, and we, have big hopes for the future. We've done some things. We just recently added last week, in fact, added a part-time writer who's a Pacifica resident to help beef up some coverage. We added the Bay City News service, which is can give us little nuggets of things going on around, San Bruno and Bay City and other places that we all venture through, whether we want to or not. My goal would be to return the Tribune to its, former glory and to, do right by the Drake family for sure. Meeting Kai a minute ago was really cool. Really, just looking at her, I just really want to make things something she can be proud of and tell her kids about. So that's, I think, all I've got to say. What do we do from here? Questions? Or?
Yeah. Works. We have another microphone here. Do you have a question, Mark?
I'd just like to state, to let everyone know that Bill Drake was a past president of the Pacifica Historical Society. Hello, everybody. Hi, I'm Mary Beer. I'm the mayor of Pacifica right now. I just want to say thank you so much for the history. Look at all the history we have in this room. It's beautiful. And Clay, we're all so grateful for you and your team. We really are. And I just want to say one thing. Horace, take my picture. Take my picture.
Well, we saw this in the in Facebook. We just had to come. I'm Rena King, but I'm Rena Azevedo King and Martin Azevedo. Yeah. And Paul and Lydia's daughter. Yeah, I think I messed up. Okay, so Paul and Lydia's daughter and son. There's four of us. Now, what I want to point out, first of all, hi, Mr. Hinshaw. So it's really wonderful that you're here. So what's great about Pacifica is I feel like I know every blade of grass. I haven't been here, I haven't lived here in more than 20 years, but we got to know it really, really well. Because when you're part of the newspaper family, it means you've got to know every route in the place. And everybody I know that was under 18 and my age, they all had newspaper routes of some form. We, as soon as we hit 10, that was our time when we started milking the cows, as it were. Our family farm was the Pacifica Tribune. I'm out there pushing a cart at 10 in the middle of Carmel, 4 o'clock in the morning on a Wednesday. And my older brothers, trying to find the houses that are all dark. And oh my gosh. And we took care of the down routes. So every route that somebody quit or they got sick or whatever, that was our domain. And so we delivered the tribs in the morning, and then we came after school and delivered the free paper. And then my mom delivered the complaints. That was what I don't even know if that's what they call them, but in our family, it was I'm delivering complaints. And it just meant people didn't get the papers. So while we're at school, mom's driving around, dropping off these newspapers. And of course, my dad started out, how he got the job was kind of funny. Mr. Drake heard that these people went to this Democratic committee meeting with Joe Fulford and such. My dad, they had moved to Pacifica because they heard it was affordable. And so when he's talking to my dad and he's trying to get this story, and it was 9 o'clock, I think on a Friday night or something like that. And my dad's like, why are you still working? And he said, well, I'm running ads. I don't have an ad man. He goes, well, I'm an ad man and I'm looking for a job. So that's how he got his job. And then my dad was so opinionated that he said, well, why don't you write a column? So trust me, we didn't agree with everything my dad wrote. Okay, so just know that. But for 29 years, he wrote The Reactor. And it was a very an apt name. But it just, and then when I grew older, after being
delivery people, we also became inserters. So we're stuffing the back of the paper to the front and the ads. And anyway, it was a rite of passage that we just went through things. One of my fun memories now is that sometimes I was getting a ride home at 2 o'clock in the morning because the paper was late that day because there was an election or something happened. Don't tell OSHA or whoever. But anyway, 16 years old, getting a ride home, and I'm in the van with the lumpers, and one of the lumpers was this huge guy we called Tiny, 310 pounds, 16 years old, and he's grabbing 4 bundles in each hand, flinging them out the back of the van to the 7-Elevens and what have you. And that Tiny was Kevin Gogan, who ended up playing for the Cowboys and the 49ers and the Raiders and such. Yes, and he was that big when he was 16. Anyway, so this is one of those fun things to be in a newspaper family. So.
May I offer a few thoughts too? Thank you. I'm Martin Azevedo, Rena's brother. First of all, thank you everybody for being here. It is great to see this and the Tribune moving forward in its way. The train upstairs, I was excited to see that. In fact, I texted David Hoffman, former circulation manager of the Tribune, because he's into trains, so I texted him a picture of it. Some news, by the way, I assume Clay has the story that, Sid Warvan, former mayor of Pacifica, passed away just a few days ago. So, yeah, I mean, he's been sick for quite a while. So, but I just wanted to acknowledge that. Sorry. I also wanted to say a little self-serving, but as you may know, some of you have talked about it. My dad wrote a column for 26 years for the paper. Pacifica history was a favorite topic of his, and I have gathered his columns into a book on Pacifica history. But I'm still trying to get it published. It's taken a long time. For one thing, my dad would write a paragraph or two with an enticing anecdote about Pacifica history, and then he'd say, "That's why I'm voting yes on this ballot measure." But if anybody happens to have any resources about, small publishing press or anything like that, I'm not exactly sure where to go. Pat Kremer has been very helpful with helping me get pictures from the files for it. And other people have offered, bits of advice or suggestions or certainly just moral support. I really appreciate it. But thank you very much.
Great seeing you guys. If you prevent you like, these papers around the room right now, all here, you know where they used to be kept? In the garage of Paul Azevedo. He had every Tribune that since he had worked at the Tribune.
Well, to be fair, they weren't always in the garage.
They were not all the way.
No, they were in the Tribune, and they were downsizing, and they were going to throw them all away. And my parents, being the pack rats that they were, that I had inherited that gene, he said, "Oh no, this is important history," and he took them all and he boxed them up. And all I can say is, I'm glad it was a Pacifica garage, not someplace where it was warmer, because there could be a worry about a fire problem. Anyway, but Deb Wong, I hope she's here. Is Deb Wong here? Well, she's the one, she took they had another place they had to go. Well, yes, but I'm saying is they got digitized, and that's what he would have wanted. And now it can be released because we all know that they have a shelf life, literally, but some of them have been around for 50, 60 years. But it's okay now because they've been preserved in a way that they look good, because scans are very different than microfilm. So anyway, we're thrilled. We're thrilled to see that.
I know Paul, you should talk about that, and that's say, Paul, I need this paper. He said, let me find it. I go find it for you. He go find it, but yeah, it's amazing. But Paul and Bill, they always keyed on history of Pacifica. They thought the paper should be a document that would live forever, that would document everything that happened in Pacifica. And if it didn't happen, it didn't happen in Pacifica, it didn't happen anywhere. They wanted to know that it was here. So he always said, yeah, you can read it about it in the San Francisco Chronicle, but you cannot read about it as good as it is right here in Pacifica. So thank you for being here, you guys. Nice seeing you.
Well, I just wanted to say just a testament for how great of a newspaper it was and how it covered everything. When it got digitized last year and we were all excited, and I told childhood friends, "Oh, the Tribune's going to be online. We'll be able to research everything." I had several people say, "I don't know if I want to." I think my dad was pulled over by police chief. And I remember there growing up and reading Police Beat all the time and seeing people's names in it. So sometimes it was like even more than you wanted to know.
Hi there, my name is Cheryl Dickinson, and I've been a resident of Pacifica most of my life. And back in the 80s, Samtrans was restructuring, and they were starting to put in Colma bars. And I used to ride a commuter bus to the city. There was like 10 of them, and we were like a community. We had parties on the bus. We really loved our bus. And so we were on the bus, and some marketing agency came on and they said, hey, we'll give you $100 if you come to one of our interviews. And it was Samtrans trying to figure out, you know, that they were going to cut the bus and what we thought about it. Well, that was it. We went to the council. It was Barbara Carr was the mayor at the time. And somebody came up to me and goes, call Chris Hunter at the Tribune. Call Chris Hunter at the Tribune. He was on the bus the next day interviewing us, front page. The guy Roland at Samtrans called me and he goes, what are you doing up there? So the Tribune was actually really instrumental in us saving our bus. They modified it once they opened up Colma Park, but we were able to save our bus for a number of years. So the Tribune really, it was like, it helped the community, keep the community together. So I just want to mention that.
Great.
While she's following up there, I'm just gonna follow up on what Shirley Gibbs said about the Bill Drake being president of the Historical Society. Actually, that's really the only organization he belonged to, because he said, I never wanted to belong to an organization because if I had to write anything negative about it, I'd be run out of town. So he said that he just chose to stay away from that. But thank you, Shirley, for bringing it up. He also was the one that initiated the name of the fog fest in Pacifica. So although there was a committee, he really was the brainchild of coming up with that name.
I'm Denise Buckley Crawford. I used to live up the street from Laura. And I think, Horace, you and I probably arrived in Pacifica at about the same time. That's when we came in. And so from the very beginning, I loved reading the Tribune. Okay, I was 11 years old. Tribune, this is great looking. And one of my favorite things, okay, other than sports, was reading the Beachcombs column. I loved Beachcombs. And of course, I was a kid by sea urchins. Who had these sea urchins? Can anyone tell me who was sea urchins?
It was Bill Drake.
It was, okay, Laura thought maybe it was. And when the Tribune got digitized, of course, the first thing you go in there, you look for your name. You find all the things you wish people didn't know. And then you find the things about your family you wish people didn't know. And I was seeing some of the older, what was it, just before the Pacifica Tribune, the Coastside Tribune? Coastside Tribune, thank you, I'm still learning this. That there was also a big Beachcombs in the Tribune, but they gave a byline. They told you who was writing it. It was different from time to time. And so it was very interesting. Oh, gosh, so thank you. You can put my 60 years of wondering. I have other questions for you. We'll take those offline. Forgot to tell you, my first byline was in the Tribune as well, and photography. Okay, because they used to have me go around. Did you like to do some of the kids?
I'm gonna do the mic, or it's just blank tape.
Sorry. I don't know who it was. Was it you, Mr. Pacini, probably, or you, or somebody at the Tribune got a deal? Could you go around and just get some pictures of the kids' teams? They don't have anybody to send out, and we'll give you a byline. There I was. No, well, in that case, it was that one in those days. But yeah, first byline, because I was in journalism with you.
I mean, Andrew, how many times did your dad lose a film in his camera, huh?
One of the most vivid memories of my childhood was hearing my dad say, "Where's my notebook?" And we would launch a search throughout the entire house for his notebook.
always carry that notebook with me.
You got water too. Water down.
Yeah, that's towel will do.
Well, first, like some stuff off.
Yeah.
Hearing Martin and Rena talk and also Horace talking about Paul's interest in history, it reminded me that in the days of cut and paste, where we waxed typeset or copy onto flats, we come up with these little tiny holes that needed filling. And Paul was amazing because he wrote maybe 2 or 3 inch squibs. And we would just cut them with an X-Acto knife and stick them on the page. It was, and eventually, I can't remember who came, it might have been, I can't remember if it was Paul who came up, but we wanted a little headline for it. And it became Sandbags. And it sort of complemented sea urchins. Little bits, and most of them were historical. Some of them were scientific, but very interesting things. Paul's interests were very broad, and it just was a really sweet feature, I thought. And it took care of our problem with the space that needed to be built.
Pat, how much time do we have?
Well,
You want to speak in a microphone, one or the other.
I'll try this one. The other one's too tricky. Does anybody have any additional comments, questions that you want recorded for Oh, good, Andrea. Oh, please, have more. This is Andrea Drake.
Very much. I'm almost in tears. This is rolled back the years for me. And I just wanted to say that this is exactly the kind of event that my father and my sister Kathy, when she was the editor, would have loved to have covered. It would have been on the front page.
Thank you, Andrew, for saying that. But if you get a chance, we've got some video up here that when Bill and Peggy retired from the Tribune, we threw a going away party for them. And we had like, I'd say about 300-400 people that crowded into this hotel room. And it really told the story of what his life and her life was all about. So if you get a chance to see that video. And I also did an interview with Bill on the footprints of Pacifica. And that's also up there. That tells a little bit about his history as well.
I was just going to point that out. When our formal get together is over, you may, of course, look at all the papers that you want around here, and please take some home with you. We only have about 1,000. It starts with 1960 over here and works its way around. We've got the 60s and 70s, 80s and 90s, and then the 2000s. You'll notice when we get up to the 2000s, the paper is a lot smaller. So 2 years fit in a box. Otherwise, we have them by year. I don't think it's by date within the year, but at least we have them by year. And upstairs, as Horace mentioned, we have a video that's the footprints of Pacifica with some clips from that retirement dinner, which must have been something. It was at Nick's, right?
No.
It wasn't?
It was in South San Francisco.
Oh, Nick's was too small.
Nick's cannot hold 300 people.
The other thing, Bill Drake's desk is right up there, and just a personal family plug. We happen to have 2 of the 4 volumes that my mother clipped out her column and stuck them on paper and kept them in a binder. So Space for Grace is up there too.
First of all, I wanted to say my dad's big anniversary party was at Nick's. So for what that's worth, upstairs to the right is Bill Drake's old desk. On that desk is a computer, which is set up so you can get access to newspapers.com, the old archive. And I was just using that earlier today. It's a great resource. It's wonderful to get access to those old things, but I have a question. I came across one or two issues where only the front page
I'd
seemed
like
to
to
be
make a
available.
comment or
Or
two.
there were,
Can you
little gaps in the coverage
please
here and there.
me
Is
in?
there anything we can do about that? Can we send
That's my-
somebody a message that this particular issue is not available?
We'll work on it. So picking up on what a lot of you said and Horace started with, is that the Bill Drake's newspaper was everything about the community. And as Laura was mentioning, we're several different communities before we were incorporated. And so that's really very, very helpful to enable, 9 miles and ocean and hills to unify us as a community and keep us able to talk to each other and to know about each other. And that's the art and culture and the history also, because I think it was how many thousands were the subscriptions? And I know there's competition with online media stuff, which is for some of us very boring. We don't look at it. And I think even younger people get their news bites, but they don't get that community aspect, which I think younger people also want because they're looking for things to do. And this community has such rich history. This museum is here. Thank you, Pacifica Historical folks. And it's open and by appointment as well, but it's open so many times. People walk by and say, I never knew it was here. And they're in that. And that's now 2022, right? And people want to come, and even people that come to the sports events, right, Horace? We've talked about this. Come to the sports events, but they don't know what's going on at the Sanchez or at the Performing Arts or here or other things that are going on. So I'm looking to you, Mr. Clay Lambert. I don't know how we do this with money because ads used to be it, right? And subscriptions, I guess, would help. But I think being able to have that sense of community again, like in the Bill Drake times, would really help subscriptions. But what do I know? It's media times digital. But I don't underestimate coffee shops, because we used to go, people would go out and buy the Tribune in front of the coffee shop, come in, and there'd be a big old long conversation about everything in it. Looking forward to that ability to help our community to be able to converse with each other and know what's going on in our community. And letters to the editor were awesome during the Bill Drake especially, but then later on they became a little able to be nasty, shall we say, in this community. Even though we argue and disagree about things, we don't like nasty. Yeah. And that took the subscriptions down. I believe so. People would say, I can't handle this. But nothing in that paper now is worth it if I have to look through the paper and read that nastiness. So, thank you. Thank you, everybody, for being here and for putting this on.
But, going back, just highlighting what she was talking about, Bill Drake was excited about coming to Pacifica. He enjoyed this community. He wanted everything and anything to be in the paper, and he envisioned that the time he got here, it was like 38,000 people, or about 20,000 people. And he said, I'm looking down the road, I'd like to see this city get to be 80,000 people. That was like a dream that he had. But then he realized that there was economic impact there that was not there. And 20, 30 years later, we're still at that economic impact. So but we got halfway, we got to 40,000 people. We didn't make the 80,000, we're at 40,000. But he had a vision that Pacifica was really going to grow, but unfortunately, as he said later on, he saw that it wasn't going to. But anyway, Pat, it's all yours.
Yep, we got something else.
Actually,
Pat or Jim?
the next question is going to come from my brother, who's over in Berkeley. And I hope this works, John.
I'm really impressed making this hybrid event possible. It's been terrific to at least see and hear you. And well, once upon a time, I was a historian. I became a computer scientist at Lawrence Berkeley National Laboratory for most of my professional life. But I really appreciate the role of newspapers as the first draft of history. and they're struggling now to figure out how to keep that tradition. And I am so delighted to hear about Clay's vision, proceeding as a B corporation, and I would love to talk with Clay about other ways of making this happen. I just came back from a national conference on voting integrity in Washington, D.C. There was a young man from North Carolina who spoke very eloquently about the importance of local journalism and the fact that people, although they may distrust big national, they still have some trust in their local newspapers. And that's a key part of keeping our democracy together. So I applaud this honoring of the past, but I'm even more excited about how it might help the future. Finally, I'd like to just mention that my first recollection of the Tribune, I think it was the Tribune, was when I got a job folding the paper once a week in the very early morning hours. And I'm almost certain it was in the old Sharp Park Business District. And I know for a fact there was a press in the back. This thing was operating when we were there. Probably it would not meet OSHA standards now, but it was, there was a big old press going. And I think a friend of mine and I can't remember who it was, would take one section and insert it in the other and fold them up, and they would get packaged and taken off. So thanks a lot for making it possible for me to participate in this day. You know, it's a wonderful event, and I think this is working successfully enough that it could be a way of really opening up the Historical Society events to a much wider audience in the city as well as outside of it. Thanks a lot.
Okay, formal part here is the word to remember for today. And I was just on the website for the Tribune.
Show it to me.
Oh,
Good.
where do I, am I
Walk
okay?
closer. And apparently the director
Oh, your
too.
husband and wife, right?
Perfect, right there.
Okay, so I was on the website for the Tribune, and I went to the little button that said subscribe. And I want to put in a plug here. Consider being an advocate. And this is what, it's important to subscribe, but for $200, you can be an advocate. And that's going to help make a big, big difference. Anyway, have fun, take some papers.
Take some papers.
Yeah.
Thank you all.
Thank you.